If you're an executive struggling with burnout, this is what you need to do. There are thousands of executive coaching guides out there. Nowadays, it's impossible to differentiate whether the advice from leadership gurus are legit or if they're giving out bad information. As a senior leader, you can easily get buried in the mountain of surface level, superficial stress management advice that's available. Having worked with executives experiencing burnout for over 2 decades and reflecting on my own journey, I recognize a multitude of mistakes I made and would approach things entirely differently now. Early in my executive coaching practice, I found myself deeply burnt out, working 14 hours a day with a completely compromised nervous system. Despite helping other leaders overcome stress, I was trapped in a chronic fight or flight state. I vividly recall the moment of realization, sitting back in my car after back-to-back client sessions, utterly exhausted and searching for mental space. I was coaching others on inner peace while my own inner world was in chaos. Sleep eluded me that night as my mind raced with business challenges and decisions accompanied by a growing sense of something fundamental was missing despite my achievements. And this 3 a.m. moment of brutal honesty compelled me to dive deeper, to confront the unconscious patterns driving my compulsive overwork. In this video, I will reveal the precise blueprint for overcoming executive burnout, offering you insights that I wish I had as a beginner. This video is going to be a little longer, so for those who are lacking the patience to watch it entirely, maybe true freedom from chronic stress and overwhelm may remain a little bit elusive for you. For the leaders ready to transform their relationship with work and discover authentic fulfillment, let's begin. The first step is the one that is by far the most important and yet the one overlooked by even the most successful leaders. You're treating symptoms, not root causes. Most leaders treat burnout like a tactical problem that you can fix with better time management, more delegation, or taking a vacation. They either minimize the depth of the psychological patterns or they try optimize their way out of it. The mistake is believing burnout is an external workload issue when it's actually internal emotional patterns, unprocessed trauma, perfectionism, and unconscious fears that drive compulsive overwork in the first place. I worked with a CFO who was notorious for working until 2 a.m. every night. On paper, she was incredibly successful. In practice, she was destroying her relationships and her health. She genuinely thought she was being responsible and protecting her team. In our coaching work, we discovered a pattern from her childhood. She associated rest with being lazy and disappointing others. Her overwork was actually shame disguised as dedication. When you address the root psychological drivers, you stop unconsciously recreating the same patterns of exhaustion. You go from managing burnout to actually preventing it. That unlocks sustainable energy, better decision-making under pressure, and genuine work-life integration because the compulsion to prove yourself through constant activity finally dissolves. Start with brutal self-honesty. After any moment of overwhelm or compulsive work, ask yourself, what am I really afraid will happen if I slow down? Feel where that fear lives in your body. Give it one sentence of compassionate curiosity. No fixing, just listening. Then examine the belief that's connected to the fear. Here's the practical steps. Keep a trigger log for 1 week. Note every moment you feel the urge to work when you're tired. Run a 10-minute reflection each evening asking, what was I trying to prove today? And what would happen if I let go of needing to prove that? Over time, you'll notice these compulsions soften and your relationship to work becomes more conscious. The truth is, organizational complexity amplifies unconscious patterns. When stakes are high, your unresolved material shows up as chronic stress, poor boundaries, and team dysfunction. The faster you address the psychology driving your burnout, the less energy you waste trying to manage symptoms that keep regenerating. But after addressing root causes, there is one thing that high-performing leaders will completely neglect, when in reality, it should be one of the foundational pillars of executive presence. You're confusing reactivity with strong leadership. Most executives reduce stress management to surface level interventions using sleep trackers, going to the gym, or meditation apps. Those may help, but they merely treat the symptoms. The real issue is chronic nervous system dysregulation. Your body is stuck in survival mode, interpreting every email, meeting, and decision as a potential threat. Leaders assume willpower or mental toughness will override this, which actually makes the dysregulation worse. I coached a CEO who was famous for the ability to power through things. His team respected his resilience, but behind closed doors, his cortisol levels were through the roof. He burned through direct reports, and he hadn't slept a full night in years. We mapped his stress patterns and discovered he was operating from fight or flight mode pretty much 14 hours a day. We replaced one evening email habit with a 12-minute nervous system reset routine and embedded micro-regulation practices throughout his day. Within 6 weeks, his decision clarity improved dramatically. He slept through the night. Board meetings shifted from feeling like battles to feeling strategic. Nervous system regulation widened what psychologists call the window of tolerance. Practically, that means that you can handle complexity without panic, think clearly under pressure, and hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. When your nervous system is regulated, you lead from presence instead of reactivity, and your team mirrors that calm confidence. Here are the practices that actually work. 2 to 3 minutes paced breathing before every meeting. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. After any triggering email or conversation, do 2 minutes of heart coherence breathing to reset your system. Use somatic awareness after difficult conversations. So name the sensation in your body, feel your feet on the ground, and allow a full long exhale. Create a physical anchor. I teach clients to press the thumb and forefinger together. That you pair with a regulated state during daily practice. Once a week, do a 20-minute embodiment session. Slow movement, conscious breathing, and checking in with what your body actually needs. Here's what most executives don't understand. Relaxation feels dangerous when parts of you equate reset with vulnerability or loss of control. Your nervous system has been trained to perform in order to feel safe. The paradox is that true safety and true effectiveness comes from presence, not constant performance. Learning to regulate your nervous system is both a psychological and somatic retraining process. This next piece I'm about to share with you is perhaps the most painful aspect of executive life, and yet it's one that creates the most suffering when left unaddressed. You're avoiding the loneliness of leadership. Most leaders think isolation comes with the territory of being at the top, so they just accept the loneliness and try to push through it. They believe that vulnerability would undermine their authority, so they maintain an executive persona even when it's killing them inside. The mistake is thinking that leadership loneliness is inevitable when it's actually a symptom of living behind a mask rather than showing up as a full human being. I remember my own experience with this isolation trap. There was a period where I realized I hadn't had a genuine conversation with another person in weeks. Every interaction was performative. I was the coach, the expert, the leader, but I was just never me. I was surrounded by people, but completely alone. The emotional cost was devastating. It wasn't until I started revealing my own struggles and uncertainties that I realized how the executive persona had become a prison. The paradox is that when you start showing up authentically, admitting uncertainty, sharing struggles, and revealing your humanity, your influence actually increases. Teams follow authentic leadership because they trust the person behind the role, not just the competence. Vulnerability creates connection, and connection creates loyalty that goes far deeper than transactional relationships. Here's how to break the isolation. First, find spaces where you can drop the armor completely. This might be peer groups with other executives, deep coaching relationships, or spiritual communities where your title means nothing. Second, practice micro vulnerabilities in low stakes situations. Share genuine struggle with a trusted colleague. Admit uncertainty in a team meeting instead of pretending to have all the answers. And thirdly, create sanctuary spaces in your life where you can be fully human. Relationships, activities, or rituals where performance isn't required. The goal isn't to become emotionally vulnerable with everyone, but to have enough authentic connection in your life that the executive role doesn't consume your entire identity. By the way, if you want some help implementing this deep inner work I'm talking about in this video, you can click the first link in the description to learn about my executive coaching programs that deliver measurable nervous system calming within 2 to 3 sessions and long-term transformation within 12 to 24 months. But there's something even deeper than loneliness that's driving burnout, an addiction that most successful people don't even realize they have. They're addicted to being indispensable. Most executives believe that if they're not constantly involved and making decisions, everything will fall apart. They unconsciously create dependency rather than empowering their teams to function autonomously. The psychological payoff is feeling needed and important, but the cost is chronic overwhelm and teams that can't operate without constant input. I worked with a founder who couldn't take a single day off without his phone exploding with urgent decisions that only he could make. He believed this proved how valuable he was to the organization. In reality, he had unconsciously designed systems that require his constant involvement because being needed felt safe. When we examined the deeper psychology, we found that his identity was so tied to being indispensable that he was terrified of his worth, of what his worth would be if people didn't need him. What conscious leadership actually looks like is creating systems where you're not needed for the day-to-day operations. You operate at your highest contribution, vision, strategy, culture, rather than getting caught in operational busy work that feeds your ego but depletes your energy. This is what I call conscious obsolescence, deliberately building capabilities in your team so that your presence elevates the organization rather than being required for basic function. Start by examining this question honestly. What would it mean about my worth if my team could function without me? Notice what fears come up. Then begin delegating not just tasks, but actual decision-making authority. Give people problems to solve rather than solutions to implement. Redefine your value from being busy to being strategic, from being needed to being inspiring. The shift from indispensable to irreplaceable is the difference between trapped by your role and being liberated to create real impact. This next revelation is the most uncomfortable truth about high achievement, and it's why success can feel so hollow even when you have everything you thought you wanted. You're using success to avoid feeling your feelings. Most high-performing executives unconsciously use achievement as a drug to avoid dealing with difficult emotions. Success becomes a way to regulate shame, fear, grief, or other uncomfortable feelings that were never properly processed. The problem is the accomplishment can't heal these wounds. It just temporarily masks them. Eventually, the emptiness catches up, leading to what I call success depression. I've seen this pattern countless times. The client sells the company for millions and then falls into despair. Another gets promoted as CEO and feels more empty than ever. The external validation they thought would fill the void just reveals how deep the void actually is. In my own journey, I realized I was using helping others as a way to avoid dealing with my own pain. Every client transformation became a hit of worthiness that temporarily quieted my inner critic. What it means to sit with discomfort is learning to be with difficult emotions without immediately escaping into work or achievement. This is what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. And you can be successful and feel empty, accomplished and searching for meaning. The goal isn't to eliminate difficult feelings, but to develop the capacity to be with them consciously. Here are the practices that create this capacity. Create daily space for feeling rather than doing and thinking. Even 10 minutes of sitting with whatever emotion is present without trying to fix it or change it. When grief, fear, or shame arises, resist the urge to achieve your way out of it. Instead, ask the feeling what it needs to be witnessed. Practice distinguishing between healing, which requires presence and feeling, and escaping, which uses activity to avoid feeling. The paradox is that when you stop running from difficult emotions through constant achievement, you actually become more effective because your actions come from choice rather than compulsion. The next step is the one that integrates everything we've covered, and without it, all the other work remains fragmented and incomplete. You need to develop a relationship with your unconscious. Most leadership development focuses on conscious strategies, better communication, improved delegation, smarter goal setting, but conscious efforts are constantly sabotaged by unconscious patterns that you're not even aware of. These are the psychological blind spots that create the same problems over and over again. No matter how much willpower or technique you apply, real transformation requires what Jung called making the unconscious conscious. This means paying attention to your dreams, noticing what triggers you about other people, and recognizing the parts of yourself you've disowned or rejected. It means understanding the things you judge most harshly in others are often reflections of aspects of yourself you haven't integrated. I worked with a COO who kept hiring people who disappointed him. He thought it was a hiring problem, but when we dug deeper, we found that he was unconsciously attracted to people who reflect disowned, lazy part. The part of him that just wanted to rest. By integrating this shadow aspect and giving himself permission to have downtime, he stopped projecting it onto others and started making much better hiring decisions. This deeper work creates what I call soul-centered leadership. Leadership that comes from your authentic essence rather than ego strategies. You develop inner authority that doesn't need external validation. You find peace that remains stable regardless the external circumstances. You access wisdom that goes beyond analytical thinking. Begin this work by paying attention to your strong reactions. What triggers anger, judgment, or avoidance in you? These are the doorways to unconscious material. Start a dream journal. Look for recurring themes. Find guides who understand both psychology and spirituality to support deeper exploration. Create daily rituals that connect you with something larger than your ego, whether that's meditation, prayer, time in nature, or creative expression. And there's one more piece that ties all of this together. The piece that most executives never address because it requires surrendering control completely. You must learn to surrender the outcome. The final piece that most executives struggle with is the addiction to controlling outcomes. You exhaust yourself trying to manage every variable, predict every scenario, and guarantee every result. The irony is that this attempt to control everything actually creates more stress and often leads to worse outcomes because you're operating from tension rather than flow. What surrender means in leadership is doing your absolute best work while releasing attachment to specific results. It's trusting that when you show up authentically, take right action, and stay aligned with your values, the outcomes that emerge will be better than what you could have forced through control and manipulation. I learned this the hard way in my own business. I spent years trying to control every aspect of client transformation, getting frustrated when people didn't change on my timeline or in the way I thought they should. The moment I shifted to focusing on my own presence and quality of service while letting go of attachment to specific outcomes, everything changed. Clients started transforming more quickly and deeply, and I found a peace in my work that I never experienced. The paradox of surrender is that letting go actually increases your effectiveness. When you're not attached to outcomes, you make clearer decisions because you're not clouded by anxiety about results. You take more creative risks because you're not paralyzed by fear of failure. You show up more authentically because you're not performing from a particular response. Practice this through daily rituals that cultivate trust and letting go. Morning intention setting that focuses on your process rather than outcomes. Evening reflection that celebrates effort rather than results. And regular practices that connect you to something larger than your individual will, whether that's prayer, meditation, or time in nature. So if you're struggling with executive burnout, hopefully this video was the wake-up call you needed to finally address the real causes rather than just managing the symptoms. If you follow every single insight in this video, I promise you, you will start to see shifts in your relationships to everything: work, stress, leadership, all of it. But having said that, doing this inner work alone is clearly easier said than done. The unconscious patterns driving your burnout have been decades in the making. You're dealing with nervous system dysregulation that follows you everywhere. You need to navigate the intersection of psychology, spirituality, and leadership that most executive coaches avoid entirely. The resistance you'll face when examining these deep patterns can be overwhelming without proper guidance. And with everything I've given you, you really have two options. Try to figure this out yourself. Knowing all the emotional resistance and psychological blind spots you'll inevitably face, I really do wish you the best of luck. Or work with someone who specializes in mastery of being and has guided countless executives through this exact transformation. If you picked the second option, then click the link in the description to learn more about our executive coaching programs that deliver measurable results across 3 time frames: immediate nervous system calming within 2 to 3 sessions, dissolution of root patterns in 3 to 6 months, and long-term stabilization of inner peace, authentic power within 12 to 24 months. Also, check out this video on screen to learn more about how to transform reactive leadership to conscious presence. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.